The Speaking of Cults podcast is presented solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from it is at the user's own risk. The views, information, or opinions expressed by the host and guests are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute medical or other professional advice. Hello and welcome to the Speaking of Cults podcast. This is Chris Shelton, your host. Thank you very much for joining me this week. I have an interview I've been looking forward to doing for some time now that we're going to do today. And hopefully this may be the first of a number of interviews that I do with this individual. I'm welcoming to my show for the first time today. His name is Shawn McCraney. He is he's a lot of things. And we're going to talk about his origin story a bit today and some things like that. He has been featured on John Attak's podcast. I first found out about him through interviews that a friend of mine named Matt had done with him. And he is like I said, he's an interesting man. Shawn, first off, just welcome to my show.
Thanks, Chris. I am so excited to be here. And I, too, have heard so many things about you over the years talking with Matt and John. And also, we have a common interest in control and cults and all that stuff. So I really look forward to this open forum to talk about anything.
Yeah, let's do it. All right, good. Because I'm always coming at it from the psych angle, and I'm kind of a cult guy because I'm a Scientology survivor and all that. And first off, for my audience, because I know a lot of folks aren't going to know you or your background or anything, so let's go ahead and start with that. First off, how would you describe yourself simply, in simple terms, at this point in time? Pastor, father, how do you identify?
I guess the best way to identify myself in the most concrete core terms is I'm an artist.
Hey, cool. Okay, that works. That absolutely works. Now, the first thing I want to start with, and probably I'm a former Scientologist, and that's the conversation starter for me with people. I'm a lot more than that, but that's a way to frame who I am. You are as John has put it, a reformed sociopath. And that is a way to start. There are many other things to you, but that is a thing. I wanted to ask maybe to start with, did you receive a formal diagnosis of sociopathy, or how did that label and you come together?
It came together in a couple ways. It first came to me from my mother, who, when I was probably 12 or 13, said, "I think you're a sociopath." I'd never heard of it. And so I searched out to find out what that meant. But it didn't really sink in back in those days. I'm older. I'm 63. So that was back when no one really that I knew what that was. But as my life became more convoluted and difficult, I sought out professional help. First with a psychologist, and then she recommended me to a psychiatrist. And that was where the term was used again. Now, I have to be frank here. I don't know in my time with the psychiatrist and the psychologist if there was a test that said you are a sociopath, but they use that term frequently in our discussions. And because I took the hair test on sociopathy later as an adult, a changed adult, and I scored really, really high about in my former life of what a sociopath was, then I believe that at one point I certainly was a sociopath. I should probably say am, because I don't relate to the world around me the way I hear other people saying it should be. I think of it in a very different way. And so I've had to change how I do that. So that's kind of the backstory on the sociopathy.
Excellent. Thank you for that and for the frankness on it. What do you understand, and what was the understanding of that term as it was used with you in these circumstances. I mean, yeah, your mom saying that is like, okay, moms say lots of things, right? But then you end up in a professional office and professionals are bandying this term around. How did you come to understand what this term meant for you?
First of all, Chris, the terms sociopath and psychopath were kind of jointly used in that time.
Yep.
And I think it was Hare's test on psychopathy and not sociopathy that I took.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not sure where it really sits, but I think what I have come to understand myself to be, which whatever title applies to me, is I don't have much empathy naturally for anybody anywhere.
Okay.
I just don't feel I don't feel natural love, natural care for others, and I don't naturally feel any need to comply with anybody anywhere, including the law, unless I'm going to get caught. I don't have really a moral standard in terms of sex, drugs, rock and roll. I anything is open to me and is in fact, and I have kind of a hatred. I'm a little bit of a misanthrope toward human beings, and those general titles I can assign to my, I'm going to call it, former life.
Right. And this was up until around 1997 or so, when there was sort of a shift.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, good. And we're definitely going to get to that because I have many questions. This has been something I've been thinking about, reading about, studying, and conversing with people like Matt and John for years now. And so, but most, as I think you'll understand, most sociopaths and psychopaths don't present themselves to answer questions. And those that do, there's always trust issues, right? Because it's always sort of like, what's going on here? What's the motivation really, right? Because if you have somebody who literally says, as you just did, I don't care about anybody else, then... then there would only be self-seeking goals or self-gratuitous goals involved in such a personality coming forward and saying things. And then, are they saying things that are true, or are they saying things that are titillating? You know,
and beneficial to the self. And that certainly would have been my motivation for talking to you pre-97,
right?
And even post-97 for quite a few years.
Yeah, because it's a gradual process.
Yeah,
for sure. Okay, well, we sort of established that in terms of your background. And so would it be accurate to say, in terms of your former life, that had you seen, like, for example, you talk about empathy and not being there. You see a child crying over something, you feel no compulsion to do anything about that or try to see what's going on?
Pre-97, no.
Mm-hmm.
Unless I was being observed and I could benefit somehow by my showing care by an attractive mother or something like that. If I could be seen as benevolent, then I would behave that way. But crying child, I'd just be like, stop it, get out of here. What is going on? Right. You're infringing upon my world.
Right. You're making my world worse. Knock it off.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Makes sense. And yet, okay. And so that being the case, yet you did get married and you did have kids.
Yes. 3 daughters.
Yes. 3 daughters. That's right. How were your feelings or attitudes towards those people specifically? Because they would be the closest to you, we could say, right? What was your feelings and attitudes towards those people pre-97?
My wife was a perfunctory element to what I thought was necessary to be successful.
Oh.
I engaged in marriage, not faithfully, but in those days, but I engaged in marriage as kind of a contract in order to progress through life in a respectable way that I was told is important. I wasn't so devoid of intellect that I said, I'm just going to be free and wild and do what I want. I have an intellect of self-survival to continue on. So I knew that marrying a good woman in a right way was going to be beneficial to my overall objectives rather than just burn out. That was my approach to her. Things changed, which may cause some question as to how psychotic I am. But when I had children, it shifted from duty. It was probably 90% duty, but there was some feelings that I started to see in myself toward their little persons. And I think that there was something to the about them loving me unconditionally. Again, it was all about me, but that they loved me. And I have never really thought, and I still wonder about people loving each other unconditionally. I think it's often a ruse. There's always conditions.
Yes.
And I don't trust it.
Yeah.
But with them, I could see it, and it really did go a long way to softening something in me I hadn't experienced before.
Yeah, that really made a lot of sense to me when I first heard that aspect of your story, because, of course, our biology is tuned to do exactly what you just said. Especially with children to parents, but parents and mothers to children more strongly, classically speaking, than fathers to children. And yet that biology is undeniable. It is there. And
it's there.
And the push and drives that drive us at an instinctive level are not to be denied or trifled with. They can be quite powerful forces for us.
Yes.
So I'm not at all surprised that drove some of your change. Let's go ahead and describe, separate from the family, what was your behavior like with other people? You had described incidents of road rage and things like that, but how was your general attitude towards the world and the people in it?
Generally, unless circumstantially altered, it would have been charming. Very charming. And I was an attractive younger man, and that draws both males and females toward you. Males want what you have and what you're getting from that, and females, they like that. So I parlayed that into a lot of charm, and I used that to try to get what I really wanted from people. Okay, makes sense. And how did you really think about them? I cared about what they did for me in terms of entertainment, sociability, sexuality. But if they crossed over the line of becoming more of a burden, I didn't give a shit about them at all.
Right. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. It sounds an awful lot. I talk about cults, and I try to relate it to people in a way that I go, look, there's all this regular behavior that people get up to in groups. They like their groups, team sports, mascots, wear the team colors, all the stuff. Loyalty to their company over other company. If you work for Coke, you're probably going to drink Coke, not go off and drink Pepsi, that kind of thing. But cults always dial it up to 11. They take all the stuff and they just make it crazy. And it seems like when we start talking about the behavior you're describing and the way you look at the world, it's sort of very similar to how other people, people can be transactional. People can be, well, what are you doing for me today? Nothing? Okay, well, I guess I'm not doing anything for you either. And that's not necessarily sociopathic. It's just kind of people. Yeah. But you can dial it up to 11, and now it's too much. Now we're into the land of we're hurting or abusing or we're somehow destructive in our behavior. How did would that be something you would agree with as a way of framing it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I sense in your description um, that normal indifference we have toward each other. If we can't get, with me, there was a little bit more of a
Mhm.
depth of wanting to pray because
Prey.
yeah,
Yeah.
no AY.
Yeah.
I wanted to prey on them so that I could not control them. I've never been about control, but I've wanted to get their allegiance to me. And I wanted them to worship me almost. I can say that now. I never thought of it that way then. I wanted the woman to be, the girls, all the way back, young, to give me adoration. And I wanted the friends to give their allegiance to me. And I would use that charm to get them to be that way. And if it took too much work, I didn't want anything to do with them. I looked for those where I could get that from them to feed my ego somehow and feel satisfied with my life.
That's about as perfect a description as I've ever given. So it sounds good to me. Because that is exactly what a predator is doing, right? In terms of preying on people. Their worth is measured by admiration, or, again, it becomes kind of transactional, right? What are they doing for you or giving you? How much of that equation revolved around what you were giving back to them?
Actually, I gave a lot to them,
Tell me.
but I mean, I would be a really good friend, and I was always generous. And I'm a generous person in terms of like money, buying dinners, buying gifts, romancing. I would always do that, but it wasn't because I felt it. It was because I thought it would work.
Right. Right. There's the predator part. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Because it's a manipulation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a knowing manipulation.
Yes.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because that's where it becomes a bit. Well, I mean, there's a lot of words we could use, fake or plastic or whatever, right? But at the end of the day, it's just kind of manipulation. And if there's too much of that, of course, that's when we cross the line over into control.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, there were a series of events that led to a change. Oh, let me back up a second. Sorry. There was one other thing I wanted to make sure we set the stage for in terms of your origin story here, which was your proclivity to violence.
Yeah.
You weren't just a not nice guy sometimes. Right. You got really out of control.
Yeah.
Could you talk about your history of that going back to your childhood, just so we can kind of get the full picture of that part of your personality?
Yeah, I think the penchant for violence has always been with me, and if the romance and the kindness and the good guy stuff doesn't work, then when I was younger, I immediately went to kind of in a very bold and abrasive manner, and then if that didn't work, it could become even physical with friends. And then as I matured and got hormones into my teen years, it was I was a very violent person toward anybody. If they looked at me wrong, if they challenged me, if they did something I didn't like, I was violent to the point where fistfights were normative almost weekly, and street fights and pulling over to the side of the road. The road rage was just insane. And, breaking off antennas and smashing my hand against windows. I never broke one. Challenging people to get out, just to get out and fight. And some would and some wouldn't. It just culminated to this point of being utterly ridiculous. I can't remember, I say it different ways, but I think there was one day where I had 3 outside of the car fights in different locations with different people. And that kind of was a breaking point where I realized, something is really wrong here.
Yeah.
I know, yeah, I'm laughing, but Chris, the problem is I'm still that way. I really am. And
Mm,
that's the thing that Matt and John were kind of interested in, is that has really not changed in any way with me. I've just learned how to change it and approach it. And that has led my heart to see some situations much, much better than I ever did. But
right.
we can get to that later. But that was the situation: violence and anger and rage in my life.
Right, very much so, and it stood out for me in learning about your past that was such a key component of growing up, and how you were even sort of raised to think. I mean, you can you talk briefly about your family situation?
My parents were, I'll just say it the way I see it. I'm sorry if it offends people, but they were essentially white trash.
Mm-hmm.
My mom was 13 when she married my dad at 17 in East Los Angeles.
Mm.
They came from poor white trash backgrounds. My dad's parents, both alcoholics, all that. And they were driven to really bring something, make their lives better. But they did it through tough, kind of callous ways. And my mom was kind of the mindset that gangsters were good. That if you
Mm-hmm.
were like a gangster, you would get respect in this world. You don't put up with anybody's anything. And she taught me to be that way. And so, not only that, she was also physically violent. And now my mom was a really good mom in many ways. And so I feel bad sometimes in how I do this, but she's dead, and it's the facts. And nobody's going to change unless we speak of facts.
Mm-hmm.
She was a bit violent. She was emotionally out of control. And my dad would reach points where he too became violent. So they screamed at each other almost every day that they were together in their home. They were more like brothers and sisters than husband and wife, and all their kids were raised in that environment. And so I, for some reason, absorbed the most negative reactions to that environment than most of my other brothers and sisters.
Got it. How many brothers and sisters?
I have three sisters and I have two other brothers, and one is deceased.
Wow. Okay, so kind of Brady Bunch size family.
Yeah, three and
Yeah.
three.
Yep, 3 and 3. Okay, and now 2 and 3. Were there again, just to kind of set the stage here, not because I'm trying to make your mother out to be worse than she was, but as you've said,
Yeah.
she engaged in some pretty nasty behavior. Was there physical violence towards the children growing up?
Oh yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, and it wasn't just the physical violence, because she wouldn't beat me till I was black and blue. But to give you an example,
Mm-hmm.
she was emotionally troubled by my dad. Her and my dad had that problem. And I was maybe 4 or 5. And I heard them screaming at her saying, "I'm leaving for good. I'm never coming back." Well, I didn't want that. So I ran to the door and I put my back against the door and I said, "Don't go." And she grabbed me by the hair and she banged my head against the wall saying, "I hate you. I hate you. Get out of my way." And I was trying to show her love and to let her know I want you to stay. And her response to that was violence. And so it would be things like that. Additionally, she had problems with emotionally with saying words that were kind if she got upset. So I think I might get a lot of this from my mom.
Mm.
If she was confronted and challenged, she would use really biting words, really harsh, hurtful words. So the physical side was not, by the time I was 12, she couldn't touch me and she knew it. But it was the words that were painful then.
Yeah, for sure. It sounds like things were a little chaotic.
Very chaotic. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Certainly the opposite of ideal situation for raising a child in.
Right, right.
Yeah.
The only time it was ideal, my mom was a wonderful cook and she loved to provide. And so, unfortunately, those were the times when, every now and then we could have a meal where there was no outbursts. So I tie peace to food, and I have a horrible problem with food. It is my go-to for comfort. So, yeah.
Well, I can certainly relate. Okay.
You don't look like it.
No, I know, but
Come on.
Yeah. Okay. So now let's get to 1997. So basically, we can see kind of rough life, rough upbringing, violence, very much a part of this. Manipulation, very much a part of this, and this is kind of your social world and kind of your family life. Is there any other aspects of this or big parts of this that I am missing or that we've left out?
Religion was a huge part of it.
Of course, Mormonism. You were raised Mormon, right?
Yeah, I was raised Mormon, and my parents, when they married, my mom converted to Mormonism in Los Angeles, where they lived, and that gave them a structure on how to raise the kids, and they used that structure to help mold us and govern us, and they let their leaders do that with us, and that was a blessing and a curse. And it was a blessing in a way because Mormonism as a culture is pretty fantastic, unless you know what they're really doing to you, and then it becomes less.
Right. At least there's some structure there.
Yeah. There's community. They call you brother and sister and all the stuff you know about, Chris. So it worked well when I was younger, but then I got a library card.
Yeah. Okay, good way of putting it. And how was your education, by the way, in terms of religion and out of religion? How was education during your upbringing?
Oh, I was not educated in any way, shape, or form. I cheated in everything. I prided myself in never bringing a book home from high school once. I never did one thing. I cheated, and I cheated my way to get out of high school. I cheated my way to go through college commencement. I cheated in every way. And so I did not start to learn anything until later.
Interesting. That's very interesting. And you have read and learned quite a bit since then, being motivated to do so as an adult. Let's go ahead and get to this now. So what were the series of events that, as you see it in hindsight, that led to this sort of event that happens in 97 on the roadside? And please describe what occurred.
Well, paradoxically, to everything I've said, and as incongruent as this will sound, I truly wanted to be authentic. And that was in part from my resonation to the punk movement, which was a burgeoning scene when I was in high school.
Right. This is what, mid late 70s?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it came to Huntington Beach, where I grew up, in a way that was almost like part of LA, came to Southern California somehow. And there was a scene there. And so I had resonation to different music types with my older siblings and enjoyed all of it. But when punk came, I found my identity. Johnny Rotten, fuck this and fuck that, fuck it all, the fucking brats. And it was so angry and real. And I'm like, this is my life. And through the music, I started to realize, lying's not good. Punks don't like lying. They like authentic expression. And I really resonated to that. Well, that germinated in me this desire to be real, but I was anything but real. I was the opposite of real. Right. And so that put me on the path. The religious training taught me to be inauthentic because Mormons have a certain persona. I went on a Mormon mission. I got married in the Mormon temple. I had callings and I looked the part. There were no tattoos or beard or anything. I looked like a Mormon. And so there was a conflict in me. I was married to and still am married to a beautiful woman, but I was going out on her constantly. So again, inauthentic. Right. So I had this idea of what I could be, and yet I had no ability to be that. And that led me to something I developed in my teens in the punk movement of self-harm. and I started burning and cutting and hurting my flesh as a way to release this conflict. And I've got the scars all over to show it. And that began to, it was a slippery slope, because pretty soon, you're thinking of cutting off body parts, and you're using things to desensitize yourself. And, at the same time, I'm trying to uphold looking like a Mormon. And the way I say it is, I was really just really inauthentic in everything I ever did. And that was the opposite of what I longed for. And that led me to a point where it was an afternoon in August of 97 where my wife asked me to go and pick up our daughters from a gymnastics practice in Costa Mesa. And I was driving from Huntington over a bridge, and I turned on the radio, and there was a Christian pastor. I don't know how I was on the station, but I had done a lot of reading, a lot of searching for authenticity, a lot of Herman Hesse, a lot of just exploratory thought. I had tried everything. I really tried to understand Marxism for a while and thought I could find a home there. And it was through literature and books that I started to get educated. And I was really in this conflicted place. And this pastor asked a question over the radio. He said, if you could get yourself right before God, why haven't you done it? Well, my Mormon upbringing always was trying to get me right before God. They disciplined me and they told me what was wrong with me. And I was like, I've tried. I went on the mission. I married in your temple. So I tried that, and then he said, the reason that you haven't been able to do it, Chris, as he says, is because you can't. You can't do it. And that was the first time, because Mormons are all about you can do it, And I was like, I can't. And then he dropped the bomb that many people won't embrace or accept, and I love them irrespective of that. But he said, and that's why God sent his son, to do what you can't do. He lived in a way that you can't live, and all he wants you to do is look to him. Just trust him and his work and not your own. And by the end of that day, I explained it that I was radically born again. I had a change in perception of where to pull my strength from. Instead of looking in the mirror and being the Ubermensch, the Nietzschean Ubermensch, I realized, no, I need to look at something that is described as better than me, lived better than me, and loved better than me. And all I got to do is trust in that idea, and that his power will come to me. And that's when things started to change.
There we go. Yeah, how interesting. How interesting. So this would be what we might call an epiphany.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And I personally believe in the transformative power of those moments in our lives. I believe that they are, by my own experience and by, listening to so many people like you, I believe they are built up. I don't believe there's some flash in the pan, I was a sinner and suddenly I'm a saint. I think it's a series of things that sort of prime a brain to build up to these kinds of big moments. My big moment leaving Scientology was realizing I was telling more lies than I was telling the truth. And I'm not a liar, so that rocked my entire world to realize that. And I don't want to be a liar, right? I was raised to be an honest person. And so finding out that I was a professional level, class A asshole liar was like, what the hell, right? What's going on with my life here? How did this happen? And these are these epiphanal moments, these moments where you just go, whoa, and lots of things change quickly. But it didn't change all overnight. As you said, it led to a series of things. What did that spark? How did you move forward? Did you go home that night? Honey, you're not going to believe, or was it a bit more of a gradual thing?
Well, I told her, but this was just another thing in a long litany of things I had experienced that added perhaps to this moment.
Yeah.
And so she took it with a grain of salt. I was still an active Mormon, and it was just like, well, let's just see. And there was nothing. But I knew, I believed, I perceived, I'm not going to use the word no. I perceived within me that there was a change and a shift, and I found a peace. and that I could build on from that point. So what happened at that time is I stopped caring about being a Mormon. I stayed in it for another 4 years, but I didn't care about that as much. And I started when I would want to react in the ways I was accustomed to reacting, I started to think, well, is this what I'm supposed to do? I'm kind of summarizing it all. And then that process led me to an entire change of life. I went from being a stockbroker of 13 years and being a Mormon, and I left it all. And I then embarked on learning about this thing that I experienced. I want to add one thing, Chris.
Yeah.
Is, I'm sure you've read or heard of William James and the Variety of Religious Experience. He concurs with what you said. These transformative moments, these epiphanies happen in every culture. And ever since I had mine, I still have them to a different way that bring me to a new place. So I'm fully behind what you're saying happened with you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It happened, and then I learned what the words were for it. And when that happens, then you just know there's something to it. There's something there, right? There's some there. And William James is probably one of the smartest guys ever. So I absolutely will put my laurels on him. I have an idea, and I wanted to ask you about this. Might as well, since we're talking about epiphanies and stuff, this might as well be a good time to ask. I believe that our morality is created by our circumstances and our social situation, because morals are all about how we, relate to others in terms of how we think about good, bad, right, and wrong. You grew up in and had structure. You had Mormonism, you had a moral framework that you ostensibly agreed with in public and lived by or tried to live by, and yet it did not solve or deal with, really, even address the violence or the transactional relationships or the selfishness or the way you would navigate your life. And yet there was certainly rules and structure and a moral foundation there. Why did that not work for you, do you think?
I think it harkens back to why I would have such an affinity to punk. They don't want structure either. They're rebellious. You talked about the collective experience in cultures with teams and all that. I was never a team player. Anything I did where there was a kind of a collective mindset, I could do it for a while, and I'd say, the way I would sit in my mind is, fuck this. You guys are a bunch of losers. And no matter what it was, and these were good people. So I think it's part of that side of me that is more sociopath, that just says, I don't care about all these I wanted something where people aren't operating in a group out of fear with each other or from the top of the group. I wanted to operate so independently that nobody could tell me one way or another how to live, be, dress, eat, think, or anything. And so I think that's why I think that's the best way I could probably answer your question.
I think that's a wonderful answer. Thank you for putting it that way. It leads me to ask, a lot of people believe, and I'm sure from, the position you're in now where you're, more of a religious philosopher, leader type person now, that you have seen that a lot of people will try to substitute that structure I just described for real morality or a real ability to get along in life or navigate the problems of life. They think that structure is going to be a substitute for them. What would you say to that?
I would say that there's value in that. I think that that's the way probably most people operate. Like you were saying, in general, most people understand the value of being part of a group and how, like geese can fly far further in distance in a group than a single eagle because they rely on each other, and they're smart enough to see the value in that, and they're willing to give and take in the community to benefit. but I didn't care about the benefiting. I cared more about living as true to what I wanted to be and do, irrespective of anything, anybody at all.
Right.
Did that answer you?
Not exactly, but I realized I sort of didn't frame my question or said it properly. So let me modify that a little bit. I'm looking at a kind of hypocrisy, if you will.
Oh, okay.
Right? In that I absolutely understand. And we are, if you read The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, talks about moral foundations theory, and he talks about how we're like 90% bee and 10% monkey or something, right? In other words, we're very social creatures. Yeah. We very much want and need to be in groups because that's way easier for us to survive together than separately and individually. So that's just kind of mammalian herd behavior, and certainly part of what drives us. Yet there are a group of people, you could say a statistical percentage of people, who go to church, who involve themselves in the structure of our society, but aren't really feeling part of it.
Oh, I see.
They don't feel right.
Yeah.
Right? They feel like something's really wrong.
Yeah.
And this structure is supposed to fix that, and it isn't fixing it. I go to church every Sunday. I read my Bible. I memorize the passages.
Yeah.
I still feel empty inside. I do not feel God in my heart. I do not feel love for my fellows, right? And it feels to me like that was kind of the position you were in.
It was.
Other people are certainly in that position. It's not a reflection of sociopathy to be in that position.
Yeah.
It's just a struggle.
Yeah.
Your sociopathy drove you towards violence and towards transactional relationships, but this is a sort of a separate thing I'm bringing up right now, where religion just ain't doing it.
Yeah.
But then a series of things happen where now it is. And it took a completely foundational change in how you thought about religion and what it was doing for you to make that happen. And I just wanted to comment on that fact that we substitute the structure for the reality sometimes.
Yeah.
I wanted to get your feedback on that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. But what I've been involved with for the past 20 years has been to promote what we call subjective Christianity, and which is to dismantle all relationship to God through structure and through organization and groupthink, and to bring it back to the individual who can never, ever walk into a church and be closer and more fulfilled with God than all the people who sit in that and fit that form you just described. For me, Chris, the difference is in and I know this is a cliche, but it really is in the difference between having what a person believes is a personal, direct relationship with a being bigger than them, rather than trying to relate to that being through systems that have never been his intention from the start.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was getting out of reading your views and ideas about religion and about religious belief and philosophy, is that you went the opposite direction from structure. You go, no, it's not structure, it's unstructured. It's let's let go of all of that crap, because that's not really what it's all about. It's the heart and soul of it. And your ability to grasp and make a change in your social life and in your behavior in the world relied on going from structured to unstructured. And that's counterintuitive for an awful lot of people.
I know.
Can you explain more about what I just, because there's pages and pages of explanation here to your thinking on this. Can you give a little bit of how that works from structured to unstructured?
Well, all I can speak to is how it works for me. And that's where it becomes a little convoluted, because you have to wonder, well, is my brain tweaked? Am I just, is this just what I've done? And it really is nonsensical for the rest of the world. I have to admit that's possible. But here's my thinking behind it.
Uh-huh.
Culture, it's like bad religion says, we are the prey and culture is the predator. And I hate culture in almost every sense because I find it to be a collective for the weak. And I know I'm sounding very, but I just feel like cultures prey on us. They operate on a conform or you'll be cast out. And I want to be in a relationship that says, I don't care how you live, what kind of sex you have, what drugs you do, what art you like, you're accepted. That breaks down the walls of culture that religions, corporations, governments, teams all rely upon to keep together. And why I made that deconstruction the opposite way is because in my world, love does not exist when cultural demands are present. If I have to wear a red shirt to be treated equally with the other red shirts, and I wear a blue one, and that will make the people say, no, you're not one of us, fuck you. That's not love. I want to wear my red shirt, my blue shirt. I want to be able to be who I am. And I don't want you or your gods or your prophets to tell me otherwise.
Right.
I have a brain. And so I see culture as an enemy to real liberty in the human experience.
Got it. Okay, good. So would we say then that is more, I mean, the first word that comes to mind for me, right or wrong, is more of a libertarian point of view? Or,
I think so.
You know?
Yeah, not political at all, because there we have another massive ugly culture.
Yes.
But yeah, libertarian is, I think I've learned a little bit more about liberty. And I think that's what I really, liberty is everything to me, everything. Right. And I think it's everything to the God I relate to.
How interesting. And I get it. I get where you're coming from on that. And I'm mostly interested in, I'm most interested in it because it is so different from most people's experience of religion and religious belief and how they use it to inform their behavior. As you mentioned, it might just be you. I don't think so. I think that there are a percentage of people that this kind of thinking that you now preach would be very advantageous for them in their lives. I think that they could have religion, but have it in such a way that they lose all the controls and strictures of the group that they don't really want to be part of. But but socially, they kind of have to be, right?
Yes.
I think that this would appeal to a certain percentage of people, but not everybody. And I wanted to ask because I think that you've also frustratingly mentioned or noted that people seem to be afraid and they look for answers and somebody gives it to them and they go, okay, well, I'll conform with this because that way I don't have to be afraid anymore, or I can suppress my fear, or I can somehow, kind of like live my life and just kind of get along and it'll all be okay somehow, some way, right? And you seem to think that's a really, really bad way to live.
Well, I think it's a horrible way. I think it's a horrible excuse for living, to live in fear and then sell your right to think and search. But I see the fear of mostly based in the fear of pain. And they fear the pain that God will inflict if they don't do what everyone else does, the fear that their friends won't love them, the fear. And it's kind of a combination to me of fear and laziness, because if they can have something spoon fed to them by someone who calls themselves the expert, and they can eat of that and feel satisfied on a Sunday and walk out and not care anymore, that's really a shallow way to be in a relationship with something that you hold as deity. I mean, it's kind of pathetic. And so I know I'm speaking harshly, but that's why I don't see any value in people who are overtly religious, because they've just allowed themselves to be wrapped in a bunch of pseudo presentations of belief and never really step out and face the fear of life. Now, I know there are a lot of people who are preyed upon and weakened by those systems, and that's why they do it. And so I don't blame them. But when someone does it because of indifference it doesn't make sense to go to a church, give it money, volunteer, and be indifferent to what the God who's supposed to be over it cares about.
Right. Yes.
It's just that it doesn't make any sense to me.
Nor me. But social pressures are fierce. They can be very fierce. If your family, if you've been raised this way, if your family has expectations, if your spouse has expectations, it can be rough to push back against that. And studies show that 3 out of 4 people just won't.
Yeah.
They just won't.
And which is why, and I'm not doing this to blow a smoke up your skirt, Chris, but that's why you're courageous. You were involved in a system, and there's still, I don't know how many people, thousands, millions, hundreds of thousands of people in that system, and they won't leave, and they just keep drinking the Kool-Aid. And just like they did at Jonestown, just like the Mormons do, the Catholic, all the religionists do, the Republicans, the Democrats. So all of these cultures, they're all doing the same thing in a different way. And I just say, we need independence. We need true, subjective, independently minded people who have the courage, like you did, to walk the hell away from something that's making them lie more than they tell the truth.
Well, exactly. And that's where we run into integrity issues, morality issues, and social pressures, right? As far as reasons why people can't or won't do that. Yeah. Obviously, then there's also, you go even deeper, and there's, the people who, that old saying, when your job relies on, or when your paycheck relies on believing certain things, then guess what? You're going to keep believing them even in the face of evidence not to.
I want to pause on that note, because I think that's in a capitalistic system, that's truly a sign of cowardice. It shows that the almighty buck reigns over you. And you'll say, well, I got to provide for my family. Get a different job, suffer, get 2 jobs, and get out of it. But people won't do it. And I want to be someone who says to people who are religiously inclined, get out of it. Get out of it.
Yeah, me too. That's definitely where we come together, because I don't think people should be stuck in situations that they don't really want to be part of. How could that be a true expression of religious belief or, love? That doesn't make any sense. It's just so hypocritical.
Yeah.
And it's funny, because it takes an extreme individualistic view to drive this, because you are sort of anti-establishment church guy, and I just think that's hilarious.
It is hilarious.
It's
that's
amazing.
Why I am so disliked among anybody who's religious. They just hate my guts.
Yeah, it's funny, because religion's all about structure, and at least that is how Western religion has been expressed. Let's put it that way, right? There are certainly religions, and they are practiced in the West, just like in the East, that are a lot freer of strictures, but there isn't one of them that says, hey, just believe and do your own thing and go on your way. They don't, none of them ever say that.
No. And here in America, if we take our most liberal, quote unquote, Christian expression, let's just say it's Episcopalian, homosexual, lesbians can be the pastors and everything. There's still that there, but it's in the opposite direction. If I went into that group and I freely said, well, I don't think women should be doing this, I would be ostracized for that view. So it's everybody has their set of rules. And I really think almost everything in this world is culture. Everything's culture. And I hate it.
I get it. I totally get it. It is the push-pull of our mutual survival.
It is. Yeah. And that's a very mature way to say it. I think if we got rid of that and we moved up to more selfless individual survival instead of and freely associating without judgment, we would be a better society.
Well, I would definitely have to agree with you on that one. how do you see us, or do you see us getting there? Do you see that as an eventuality? I sort of see it as an eventuality for a certain set of people, but I think that there's another set of people who will never give over to that because I don't think it's in them to operate that independently.
Yeah. I to me, it seems, I've done some thinking on that. It seems to me that if people can be rightly educated over a long period of time about what are real solutions to our societal problems and what are band-aids and false solutions, that ultimately will be the thing that will, through social evolution, change the way we do things. But it's a long game. It's a long game.
Yeah, for sure. Because we've had this sort of idea of hierarchical structures with leaders that we're supposed to unquestioningly follow. That system has been in place for a very long time, and it's
a long time.
Yeah, it's kind of pack thinking, and that's some mammalian stuff. That's not even human stuff.
Yeah.
So it's funny to me actually in our 20th century, 21st century thinking that we believe we can so easily cast aside instinct, and our biology. I've come to learn over the years that it's very much not that way. We can make incremental steps forward, but it is multi-generational change that we really are seeking when we're having big talks like this one, right? Where we're making big statements about people. Now, that being maybe a future that we are working towards, what do you think people don't get right about sociopathy or psychopathy or those things, having been through what you've been through? And you're an individual. I don't take what you're saying as like the gospel of sociopathy, but you are someone who has more than the average bear of experience with this. So that being said, how do you look at society and how people generally think about this stuff and go, man, if these guys only knew, right? Or do you? Does that occur to you?
I'm not, that's a great question. It's insightful because I don't think I've ever thought, boy, I wish our psychologists, psychiatrists understood what I have or had better. I think when I have looked at what those people have discovered and what they're discovering, I think they're dead on in exactly, at least their assessment of what is there.
Right.
The only thing I would add to the narrative is I do believe that if people who possess these traits, I really try to avoid cliches, learned kind of like the 12-step program to look to something bigger than themselves and submit themselves to not being as great or better than that thing, but they, whatever that thing is, if we could teach people that might help change the chemistry or the decision-making of people like me, because that's what it essentially was in my case. I learned humility because there was none. I learned humility when I came to believe that something is bigger and better than me that loved me unconditionally. And then I also learned empathy, which I did not have. And now I possess. I never had it. And so somehow in that thing I just described to you without all the specifics to my case might help in the area of helping people who otherwise, from what I see, drugs and prison and being mad at them doesn't seem to do anything.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't at all. If anything, it sort of forces people to double and triple down on what they're already doing. Yeah. Because we need to be right at the end of the day. That is about as foundational as you're going to get, right? I was right.
Yeah.
Now, there's a very important aspect to the way you have framed your experience and think about your relationship with God, and it is not fear-based. And I found that to be fascinating in terms of the conversion moment and the behavior since. You're not, in other words, you're not doing what you're doing or thinking what you're thinking about God or religion because you're afraid of punishment.
No.
And that's very interesting because, again, for a lot of people out there, that's a very counterintuitive, backwards thing. What do you mean? I thought I was supposed to be afraid. That's the whole point. Yeah. So please explain exactly what your view is of your relationship with the deity here.
I've learned that it's a biblical principle, but I've learned that where there is fear, there cannot be love. How could I possibly really genuinely love my maker, God, if I fear him? And because the two Judeo-Christian commandments are love him and love neighbor as self, that can't be imposed upon me. I cannot love him because I fear him. Otherwise, my love is disingenuous. And so I was able to see through the analysis of the scripture that the God they have used to terrify us, there was reason for that Old Testament presence. But in the end, the love came through in what we call his son, which was unconditional. And that, in my estimation, and the people who associate with me, that unconditional love took care of everything that humans do wrong and that we choose to do wrong, and it's past, present, and future. And it was done without our complicity. I don't have to believe in it. It was given to us, the world, everybody, believer, non-Jew, Gentile, whatever, Hindu. And so when you see a God in that framework, that he loves us that much, and he doesn't care in terms of, he's not mad or angry at us at all, and there's nothing to fear from him, you're liberated to love him in return and others in return the way he would like us to. When I fail at loving other people, he's not mad at me. He just wants me to learn and grow. And this is a perception of God that is missed by most Christian denominations.
I agree. I have, of course, being who I am and doing what I do, I've focused a lot on the negative sides of religion and what it can do, and sort of the negativity of religion. I don't talk a lot about, all the fluffy light stuff because I'm kind of the abusive guy, right? So I'm hyper aware of, the abuse stuff, right? And I rail against it on a regular basis because I am not down with making kids, get beaten into submission to learn their biblical scriptures and stuff like that. I think that is instilling a hatred toward, if there is a God, and I don't believe in a Christian God, but if there were one, I'm pretty sure that's not what he wants being done with kids, right? But there are people
Amazing that a man who's not a Christian is able to come to that conclusion when all of our Christian scholars don't get it.
It blows me away. It absolutely boggles me, right? Because I do think that love is at the center of the entire message if you want to interpret it through a lens of actual humanity and care and compassion. Then you've got to accentuate the love because there's so much other nonsense going on in the Bible and through history that you kind of have to go, well, love is the only theme that really is going to make this into something useful and positive, but that's not where most people take it.
Right. The standard response that people give typically from the apologetic side of Christianity is, well, he is love, but he's also just. If he's not just, then how could you ever trust him? And they give examples like, suppose you were taking a child on a walk and a murderous savage jumped out of the bushes and killed the child, and you were just distraught, and you went to the court, and the trial comes, and the judge says, well, I love him. I love the guy who murdered the child. It's okay. And you would be just so distraught because justice wasn't done. But the Christian response to that really should be, he did bring justice. It was in and through his son offering up his life for our failures. And that's the thing that's missed. And because we believe, we don't know Jack. It's all faith,
Yep.
But if we believe that God sent his son or whoever he was, that's debated, and he died for the sins of the world, the justice has been met and love should abide. And that's the response I just kind of wanted to share.
No, absolutely. And at least as far as I'm concerned, what that looks like in the real world is that we're not going to go kill people with a death penalty, and we're not going to throw them into a cage and isolate them and drive them mad or madder, more insane, and call that justice. That's not justice.
No.
That's not.
Punishment.
Exactly. And that's not love. That's hate. And I think that these words get bandied about and misused an awful lot, so I totally get where you're coming from on that.
And it's like Victor Hugo in Les Miserables. It was the priest who extended love to Jean Valjean, who had stolen his candlesticks, just didn't care about that priest at all and stole him. When the police brought him back, the priest said, "Oh, I'm glad you came back. I have more to give you." It's the love that we can show our prisoners that will absolutely bring a change, and yet we still abide in this justice anger mode.
That's right. That's exactly right. And that instinct is what is, I think, our undoing much more than, pretty much anything else, is this sort of selfish need for immediate damage to be done.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's the hard path.
It is.
It's hard.
And that's my natural state.
Right.
I mean, that's what's always worked for me.
Right. That's what's so funny about this conversation. Oh man. Now I just have, I've got it again, about 1 billion questions, but we are kind of coming up on our time because I did want to keep this to an hour today. So I wanted to share one more thing with you, or put this out there. And this is something I probably need to do a whole show on at some point in the future, because this is kind of my thing. I think I mentioned this word to you before. I've kind of coined this term maliphony. And, okay, good. I'm going to ask you about this. So I have this concept that I've come up with. Now, I've not actually invented the word. It has been used in the past, but very, very rarely, and never this way. Epiphanies are these sudden moments of flash insight, awareness, awakening. There's a lot of words we use for it, but the lights go on. And suddenly you can see something from an entirely different point of view, or consider something from a different perspective that you hadn't before. And it can be such a magnitude of change that it literally rewrites your morality, your perspective. You can shift your entire life over it. Okay. A maliphony is a moment where that all happens, but in a direction that pushes you toward negative behavior. Mm. If you rob a store and get away with it, the glow of getting away with it afterwards, and the reveling, revel. That's funny. Those two things are connected, aren't they? You're reveling, right, in this revelation of you can get away with it. And you start imagining a life of getting away with things, and it rewrites your morality. Suddenly what's good and bad and right and wrong is a little different. Mm. Because it's justified or rationalizes further bad behavior. This is probably most exemplified, best shown in shows like Breaking Bad, where you watch somebody who's kind of on the edge. He starts off very, very, a lot of resentment, but it's all under the surface. You don't see any of it. He looks like a normal guy. Yeah. But through a series of incidents, he makes a series of calculated, determined decisions. He did it. And those decisions lead to these moments of malephony. And they actually show it in the show. These times when he's sitting in the car afterwards going, oh, and a couple of them are moments of revenge. Here's a guy who's driving around town in this fancy car, treating people like complete shit. And the main character, Walter White, right, goes up and sabotages the guy's car when he's not around and ruins it, right? Ruins the engine. And then walks off. And he's having one of those moments, right? He's like, I got away with it. The guy never knew it was him.
Yeah.
And there happens a malephony, a moment of, I can get away with shit. Does any of that ring at all familiar to you in your life?
Yeah, I think there was a time that I was pre-97 that I would probably live in that. The more I could get away with, the more I would do.
Right.
And the more it personally benefited me, and I would learn my limits and rejoice. I just literally, really, I mean, that's what violence is. It's getting immediate revenge and satisfying your carnal nature. And that does grow as we see in Breaking Bad. But yeah, I think it has a place. I think that it is a constant choice, though. I do strongly believe in all of us having a conscience that is still saying, is this really what you want to do? Every time you go a little bit darker, is this really what you want? And I'm a big proponent, much to the chagrin of my atheist friends and Calvinists, that we do have free will. I believe in it. And I think that I know there's exceptions and I know there's mitigating circumstances to all of it. But ultimately, in the end, I believe human beings have a choice.
Yep. I agree with you. I think the free will argument is a multi-layered argument.
Yeah.
And that for all practical purposes, in the experience of our life, we have free will. Now,
that's where I'm at.
Yeah, that's where I'm at too. And I can go down to the neurons and all that, and we can have that brain discussion. But I think for pragmatic, practical reasons, we have choices and we make choices. And I think the thing on the malephony is I'm trying to differentiate how evil happens versus Hannah Arendt's take on the banality of evil, right? How through indifference, inaction, unawareness, ignorance, people let bad things happen all the time, but they don't necessarily do so waking up in the morning going, right? It's just the indifference and the sort of banality of it. But then there are the predators, right? There are the people who really get up in the morning going, you know what? I'm going to go rob a bank, kill somebody today, and I'm going to have fun doing it.
Yeah.
And that's driven by malephonies, I believe, right? Where it's a path. And where we have epiphanies, where people can come out of that, I think we have a path into that. It's an idea.
I love that. And mentioning Hannah Arendt, it was one of the first books I had read in high school that started to help contribute to changing and help seeing how circumstance, culture can really mold people in ways that they normally wouldn't be. And I've always respected her, so I appreciate you bringing it up. If we have to cut it off at the hour, I do want to ask you one question now.
Fire.
It's so superfluous.
Yeah, what you got?
Do you know the song Land of Sunshine from Faith No More?
I've probably heard it, but it doesn't come to mind right away.
It's awesome. You might consider listening to it because he borrowed Mike Patton. He borrowed lines he says were from Scientology, and he was actually sued apparently by Scientology to stop asking the lines he uses in that song.
Oh,
so I was curious. I wanted today that stupid little thing to ask you if you'd heard of it.
I will look it up, and next time we talk, I will answer your question.
All right.
There we go. I've noted it down here. Shawn, thank you very much for taking the time today.
Thank you for giving me the time.
Yeah, this was fun. I've enjoyed talking with you. I very much enjoyed your views, and I hope people get something out of this. You know, it's all in the direction of trying to stave off ignorance.
Right with you, Chris. Thank you so much.
You bet. All right, folks out there, hope you enjoyed the show. Found it entertaining, informative, and educational as always. You can support the channel. You can do the things like, share, subscribe, all of that. And I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.